So we're a year into COVID, and here in Canada, we are still sitting in lockdown, severe lockdown in most parts of the country, with more and more restrictions being put in place on us every day. And after a year, it's time that the discussion really starts shifting to when does this end? And the context for this video today is the fact that the federal Liberal government put in place more travel restrictions on Canadians. And, you know, a year ago, it's important to start here, a year ago when we watched COVID-19 emerge in China and it spread rapidly, the federal Conservative Party asked the Liberal government to put in place travel restrictions so that temporary travel restrictions so that we could buy time to find out what is this thing? How do we fight it? How do we test for it? Let's make sure that we stop it coming into the country if we can, so we can control the spread. This is what the federal Liberals said on travel restrictions when it mattered a year ago.
Canadians think that we can stop this at the border, but what we see is a global pandemic, meaning that border measures actually are highly ineffective and in some cases can create harm. And we see that in some of the countries that have the worst expression, who had the tightest borders. If I point to our dear friends in Italy, in fact, they had, as you recall, some very early restrictions on international travel, in fact, shutting down borders. And what they found was an escalation of cases because, of course, borders don't stop travelers. And travelers find other ways into countries. And travelers become less honest about where they've come from, where they're traveling to, what their particular symptoms may be.
So we all know how that decision went. Patty Hajdu said that closing the borders would make things worse. COVID-19 entered Canada, and of course now it's rampant. And we have been sitting in lockdown and for months and months and months. The thing is, now there are better ways than just lockdowns and restrictions to end the pandemic. We have vaccines and there are rapid tests. The problem is that, as you are well aware, Justin Trudeau hasn't been able to get vaccines into Canada. We have a massive shortfall. And also, he hasn't been able to deploy rapid tests in any sort of meaningful way. So instead, because they've failed on those two fronts, and I could unpack why for hours, but they're telling us that we should accept more restrictions, even though there are better ways of doing things. So for example, the province of Alberta has been running a pilot at the Calgary International Airport where people come in, they get tested upon arrival. You have to stay in quarantine for a negative test. You get a second test a few days later. And if you have 2 negative tests, you can leave quarantine. This makes a lot of sense. Instead, Trudeau has put in place restrictions a year into this that they're nowhere close to that. They're just being derided by everybody. And the more important thing is that there's really no end in sight to them. Today, I asked the Transport Minister and the Health Minister a very simple question. If you're going to put in place travel restrictions, if you're vaccinated, are you exempt? Watch what their answer was.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a year after telling Canadians that border controls didn't stop the spread of COVID, the virus is now rampant across Canada, and documents show that the Liberals stalled on imposing travel restrictions at the start of the first wave, again at the beginning of the second wave, when doing so would have saved lives. The Liberals could have put in place a system of rapid testing at airports months ago, but refused this science-based approach. Canada is 2 million doses short of vaccines this week. Will those who are vaccinated be exempt from the Liberals' too late travel restrictions?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for her question. As I stated earlier, Canada today has one of the strictest rules in the world for discretionary travel. We have called a year ago on all Canadians to avoid non-essential travel. We've implemented new measures earlier in the year to make sure that all travelers are tested prior to boarding the plane, and now we're implementing new measures. There is no evidence. We still don't have information about the effect of vaccine on transmissibility. Therefore, all Canadians will be subjected to these measures.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
So now the Liberals are saying that even being vaccinated doesn't guarantee an end to restrictions. Canadians have stayed at home. They've washed their hands, they've worn masks, and they've sacrificed a lot. With rapid tests and vaccinations available to the world, but not to us, Canadians shouldn't have to accept more restrictions without a clear end in sight and without that type of a word salad from the minister. How many Canadians will have to be vaccinated before travel restrictions are eased?
The honourable minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I will just say this, the issue of vaccination and travel is a live one. I met with my G7 counterparts last week to talk about standardization of travel, international travel. Of course, my colleague is correct. We know that vaccination saves lives. The science is still unclear yet about what effect it has on transmission. That science is evolving, and we will be sharing the understandings and knowledge of vaccination as it becomes clear with Canada and the world.
So that response raises a pretty big question. If vaccines aren't going to lift travel restrictions or other restrictions, then what is? Like, you'd think that before they put these restrictions in place, they would have thought about how they're going to end them. Like, restrictions like this should be to buy time to solve a problem, not just to restrict things. Now, I get the need to ensure that COVID-19 doesn't spread, but we're a year into this and there are technologies that allow us to do better. Why haven't they looked into this? Why don't they have a plan? We need information, and the Liberals don't have it. And that's what I'm going to keep working hard to get. Working hard for you. Have a great day.